like to speak about some saints in the middle of September. First of all, September the 9th, we celebrate St. Peter Claver. Peter Claver was born in the year 1580 and called to God in the year 1654. He was born of a upper crust family in Spain, and he had a brilliant mind, and he was probably destined for an important place in the church, teaching in a Jesuit university or something. But he volunteered to go to the New World. Mercy. He went to the New World, and the New World was unfortunately pretty bad. He settled at Cartagena, which at that time would be one of the modern, Peru, I believe. At any rate, it was the center of the slave trade. And so Peter Claver would try to ease the suffering of the slave. The slaves would be brought in, they would be shackled and nailed almost to the slave ships, and they would bring them out less than cattle they were treated. Well, Peter Claver, when some of his friends would bring some incense and some soap and some things, try to restore them to health, and they would try to teach them about the Christian God. They would teach them the very basic truths of faith, and hoping that they would make an act of faith that they wanted to belong to this. It is said that he baptized 300,000 slaves during his ministry. They hated him for this. Of course, the merchants, those involved in the slave trade, thought he's nuts, and he probably was a fool for Christ's sake. But he tried to ease the suffering as much as he could. At his death, those who had ridiculed him and made sport of him and fun of him and condemned him, they vied for one another to pack his funeral. He was born in the year 1580 and called to God in the year 1654. The great apostle who never accomplished much of anything except to try to make the slaves have a decent death, to ease their suffering just a little bit. In other words, to try to be a Christian to the least of Christ's brothers and sisters. Another celebration we have during this time is September the 20th, which is the feast of, and I'm not sure I'm able to pronounce these names, Andrew Kim Tai-gan and Paul Chung Hassan and others who were the Korean martyrs. Korea is the only country in the world which converted itself. It wasn't any missionaries, but there was a man, I think his name was Wybach or something of that sort. He had a friend who was a Catholic, and he studied everything that he could find, books on Catholicism. He finally went to Beijing and was baptized in Beijing, went back to Korea, established little groups of those who would be Christian, but they still didn't have any priest. 10 years later, I think it was in 1794, he finally, after many tries, a priest was sent from Beijing to Korea. And little by little, the church grew there. And the first native priest was Father Andrew Kim Tai-gan, whom we honor. There were many of these were martyrs because the Koreans didn't want any of this Western religion. Much of it, of course, might have been nationalistic and the Confucian type of nationalism. But at any rate, when Pope John Paul II went to Korea in the latter part of the 20th century, he canonized over 100 Korean martyrs. Korea, as I say, it evangelized itself. And I think at the time that Pope John Paul was there were 1,600,000 Catholics in the little town of Korea, little state of Korea, and that was twice as many as were there 10 years previously. So there was a flourishing faith in Korea, all due to these persons who desperately wanted the Christian faith, even when they didn't have a priest, and who grew and practiced the faith. There's one little anecdote I might say. Years and years ago, we had a clergy conference here on natural family planning, and we had it from the founders of it, those who really knew what it was and who established this. And they told us the story of happening to be changing planes in Los Angeles, I believe, and this Korean doctor came, and he was a Buddhist, and he asked him about natural family planning. They explained it to him, and he went back to Korea. Even though he was not a Catholic, he established 500 clinics to teach natural family planning. So the faith flourished, and it spread even to those who may not have been converted totally, that they were captured by this wonderful culture and eventually the faith of Catholics. The other priest we'll just happen to mention is a modern priest called St. Pio of Pietrelcina. I can hardly pronounce that, but this is Padre Pio, born in the 1887 and called to God in the year 1958. He is, of course, known most of all for the stigmata, the wounds of Christ in his hands, feet, and side. But these were an embarrassment. I often think, Jesus says you shouldn't ask for a sign. No sign will be given. And sometimes we are so caught up by the sign of the stigmata or some other sign that we forget that that's not what makes a saint. What makes a saint is doing what Christ wants, trying to serve him. And that's exactly what this priest did. He spent most of his time in the confessional. It's said that he could read minds and read hearts. I think that would be kind of scary. But he did this. Spent hours and hours daily just trying to give spiritual direction, counsel, and forgiveness to Christians. Whether the stigmata were a natural phenomenon or a supernatural or hysterical or something else, he didn't like. He was embarrassed by them. But the important part is he's canonized a saint because he gave his life totally for Christ. So those saints in the middle of the month of September, St. Peter Claver, St. Andrew Kim Taigan, and St. Paul Chusan, Korean martyrs, and St. Pio of Pietrelcina, I think that's the way you say it, all giving their lives for Christ.